Welcome to the Miami Jewish Film Festival, the world's largest festival of its kind. We want to thank all of our members, sponsors, community partners, all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support throughout all of these years. My name is Lisa Siegel, and I am the cantor of Temple Beth Shalom of Miami Beach. I am so excited to be moderating a virtual conversation with actor Avi Hoffman and director Lilia Levitina from the movie You Will Not Play Wagner, which is premiering at this year's festival. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us. And first of all, I just want to express how truly honored I am to meet and to interview both of you about this intense, thought-provoking film. I thought it was an incredibly moving story. So I'd like to just begin by having you tell us about yourselves, and I guess we'll begin with Lilia. Tell us about yourself, where you're from, where you have lived and live now, and how you got into filmmaking and directing.
Well, I was born in the city of Kharkiv, which is in the news all the time. And then my family moved to Belarus, which is in the news all the time. And I lived in Minsk, the capital of Belarus, until 1988, when I immigrated to Boston, Massachusetts, as a Jewish refugee. So I've been in the States for 34 years. Theater has been my passion since 8th grade. I was not able to do theater professionally in Belarus. I did a lot of amateur theater. Here in the States, I launched my own company, theater company. I called it Basement on the Hill Stage because that's where we rehearsed and performed, in the basement of my own house. And then we burst into the Boston theater scene and performed at the Boston Center for the Arts for 5 seasons, 5 different productions, from David Mamet to a world premiere by an American playwright, Edwin DeSantis, to a Russian piece, to Alan Miller's adaptation of The Fox, a novella by D.H. Lawrence. And so I'm a theater director, and I got this piece that was initially conceived as a Zoom theater piece during COVID. And gradually, it has become clear that a movie will do it the right service. And so it has turned into a movie happening during COVID times, and Zoom as being our means of communication.
Right.
These years.
Right, at that time, right. Avi, tell us about yourself. I know you're based in Miami now, right?
I am based in Coral Springs in South Florida, but very quickly I was born in the Bronx in New York to Holocaust survivor parents. So Yiddish was my mama lashon. They decided to keep the Jewish culture and Yiddish language alive. I started doing theater when I was 4 years old in New York. My mother wrote me a musical that I could star in the Yiddish school. And at the age of 10, I started professionally in the Yiddish theater in New York. And then at 11, my father decided to leave New York and move to Israel. And so I went from being Avrom Ber to being Avi. And in Israel, growing up, I was a teenager. I did a lot of theater, film, television, and had quite a career after I graduated high school, and then came back to the States to get my degree in acting and directing. And then as soon as I graduated, the University of Miami here in Florida, I ended up going back to New York to work in the Yiddish theater. And then I did a lot of theater, Yiddish, English, and Jewish and non-Jewish, and I've had a very lucky career. And I've done a lot of things. About 7 years ago, my mother, who was professor of Yiddish at Columbia University for 25 years and an award-winning playwright and journalist, she and I decided to start a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting Yiddish language, Yiddishkeit, Jewish culture, and not letting it disappear. We called it the Yiddishkeit Initiative, which no one could spell. So we changed the branding to Why I Love Jewish. And that's who we are now, whyilovejewish.org. And I'm very, very proud to say this is my third program with the Miami Jewish Film Festival in as many years, pretty much, 3 or 4 years. So, and this piece, as soon as I got the call from Lilia and Annette first, and who I have known for many, many, many years, she and I actually did a movie together in Boston, a period piece called The Imported Bridegroom, which goes back a very long time when I was a very young man. And it was a beautiful film, and that's how I met Annette. And so she and I have maintained our relationship all these years. She sent me the script. How could I say no, especially during COVID? And interestingly enough, it's not a Zoom recording. None of it is actually recorded on Zoom, even though some of it is, or much of it is Zoom related.
Oh,
and that's Lilia's brilliance. So
beautiful. Oh, wow. It sure looked like it. Wow. Wonderful. So just Avi, can you just, or Lilia, I am intrigued. I was very intrigued with the actress Annette Miller. Can you tell me more about her? And is she a child survivor in real life?
She's not. She was born in the United States. And she graduated from Brandeis Theater School, and she has done many theater pieces in the Boston area with a very prominent theater group, Nora Company and others. And now she's a permanent member of a very prestigious Shakespeare & Co. in Berkshires. She was the one who played Golda Meir in the piece Golda. She was the first. That was the world premiere.
She's also done major roles all over the country, including right here in South Florida at the Actors Playhouse. She played the lead role in August Osage County.
That's right.
Many years ago, probably about a dozen years ago or so. And she is a brilliant actress. She's worked everywhere. And like I said, I knew her from a film where she played a small part with me. And she was incredibly delightful and wonderful. So I've always appreciated her talent.
So beautiful. Thank you. She was really wonderful in this movie. Let's talk about, Wagner's music. I did do some research about it, obviously, when I saw this film, and most notably, he's been a writer of anti-Semitism. Most notably, his essay "Judaism and Music" of 1850, and I also researched a little bit the ongoing assumed ban on Jewish music in Israel.
Wagner music, you mean?
But
Yeah, so Wagner music in Israel. Yes. So, I can talk more about that, but, this is based obviously on truth. And, I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And I found it fascinating that the movie doesn't share whether the composer Yaakov decides to stick with his Wagner work for the competition or not. And I'd like to know why this decision was made not to share the outcome.
Well, the open-endedness of the play was there from the beginning. It wasn't my idea. It was in the play, written by a South African playwright, Victor Gordon. And this would be wonderful to address this question to him, but he passed away during the adaptation process of COVID. So I'm kind of assuming that responsibility speaking for him, but I can tell that to me, it was the most beautiful idea, because this piece is about, to me, and this is how I wanted people to take it, is not about our ideological, chambers and boxing ring corners. It's about transcending the differences through art, possibly. And I believe that the interaction between Esther and Yaakov, the conductor, has helped Esther to heal the trauma that drove her ideology and her way of life through all these years. The way we played with that was that we gave Esther her childhood memory of beautiful, safe home, right, before the Crystal Nacht. That violin and that melody is actually Wagner. Then, so before it all started, before Nazis came to power, before the Holocaust, this is her leitmotif, and this has become the leitmotif of the light that art brings. In the piece, it's a Wagner violin piece called Album Blood. So I don't know if I answered coherently enough to your question, but it is through hearing each other that we heal. And it is through transcending the differences. It doesn't matter to me as a director that what will actually happen. Will he play or will he not play Wagner? But if you remember the last shots, it's his arms conducting, basically embracing this big world that is beautiful and bigger than our narrow kind of ideological convictions.
Yes.
So
beautiful, beautiful. I mean, she actually, when she was sharing her horrific memories of playing Wagner for the SS guards, petrified that if she missed a note, they could possibly kill her. Then she went on to describe the irony that it was actually his music that saved her life, the ability to play it. So I thought it was very moving. Avi, I want to give you a chance as well. And I also want to just ask you, why do you think this story was so important to tell, was important to make into a movie?
To answer your first question about, the decision not to answer the question from a playwright's perspective, and again, the playwright isn't with us to answer, but had he not chosen that, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So the idea that by not answering the question, he causes everyone who has now seen the movie to basically ask that question. And what would you do? And what do you think? And is it right? Is it wrong? Or neither? maybe there is no definitive answer one way or another. Wagner is being played all over the world every day. So it's not as if his anti-Semitism has caused him to disappear from the planet. His music continues to live on, and music is music. It's like comedy is comedy, funny is funny. And so, why is it important? I think being a child of survivors and having now done, this is now my third piece at the Miami Jewish Film Festival that is Holocaust related. The first two were actually in the Yiddish language with subtitles, and they were shorts. This is the first full length piece that I've been involved in for the festival. But being a child of survivors, I think every story is important to tell, fictional or otherwise. We are living in an America and in a world where anti-Semitism has once again reared its ugly head in the mainstream culture. And I feel as if we are trying to deal with these problems politically. Apparently, we're failing. We're trying to deal with these problems, organizationally. And, the ADL is raising a lot of money, and I think that's great. And they should continue to do great work. But apparently, that's not solving the problem. So it seems that the only way we can now try, at least from an artistic perspective, those of us who are in the arts have to do art and maybe change one mind of a person who sees this movie or any of the many projects that many of us are involved in, and changes their mind. And Kanye West will see this movie and suddenly become a Jew lover. Now, obviously, I'm being facetious, but you never know, and that's why it's important.
Yeah. So let me get on to one, because Lilia, you mentioned a little bit about the violin. The movie opens with, am I saying Esther? Right, it was Esther, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, speaking to a person named Sam about the violin, about this missing violin, and it ends up being a discovery of her own hidden violin from Kristallnacht. So how does this tie in with the story, and what was the impetus for including it?
Well, again, it was in the play. It was more in one place. We interdispersed it throughout to provide this intrigue, almost making it into a detective story, the story of the violin. But I've spoken and read, some psychological research into the trauma. And the idea is that some people suppress the memory, right? Or erase that past. It does not exist. And this is how, if they're not, totally PTSD driven and into some dysfunctional state, those who have gone through war and concentration camps, it's a typical kind of behavior. They don't talk about that. They don't talk about their past. It is suppressed. So just like Wagner, Yakov deciding to play Wagner in the final of the competition triggers a lot of memories for Esther. It's a parallel story, more of a symbolic or metaphorical piece of that past, that the past that she had seen, she had suppressed the happiest period of her life in order to be able to function and survive together with the traumatic past. She had suppressed the happy part of her life. That whole past is gone. So if Wagner triggers the memory of the trauma and the Holocaust and the concentration camp, the violin story triggers the happy memories. And this is how she's able to open up and heal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also, and talking, I know, having heard what you said, Avi, about anti-Semitism, I also think it's an important story to share in light of the fact that we are, upon that time in our history whereby our survivors are going to be gone, and this new generation of Israelis will be yet more removed from the Holocaust. So I think that's just, obviously another reason to that this movie is so important, and the storyline that went with it, and the generational, differences, in this day and age, and there's so many.
Well, once again, I want to just reinforce my thought from earlier. My
Right.
father was a survivor of Auschwitz, and he never talked about it. I didn't hear his story until literally when he was on his deathbed, and he and I ended up in a conversation where he finally shared with me some of the horrible and amazing details of his survival. And every one of these stories can be a movie. I mean, I don't know that there is one story that is not worthy. Any survival story becomes worthy, and important, if nothing else, from a perspective of education, which brings us back to how do you fight anti-Semitism? So now that it's become accepted in the mainstream culture, now that we have a former president sitting to dinner with an avowed anti-Semite and white supremacist who thought Hitler was a good guy, we now have to deal with this on a cultural level. We have to fight anti-Semitism through the arts. And so education becomes very important. How do we teach children? There is a mandate for Holocaust education in the state of Florida. The problem is the woman who wrote the mandate is a friend of mine. She's up at FAU. And she said, basically, they've cut all the funding. Yeah, the program is mandated, but it's not getting any funding. So how do you teach it? So if we can't find a way to teach kindergarten through 12 and beyond the concepts and truths of racism, prejudice, anti-Semitism, white supremacy, the history of America, and all the good and bad that comes with it, then it's just continuing from generation to generation in a bad way.
Avi, can I ask you, I don't know if you're willing to answer this or not, but I'm wondering what your own personal stance is on this. Do you feel that it doesn't really have to do with it, but I'm just kind of curious whether you felt, which side you felt more did you feel they should have, that Yaakov should have answered it or not? You don't have to answer if you don't want to.
No. Listen, I'm an open book. I'm too old to hide my feelings at this point. Obviously the character, which I played, felt pretty strongly, that probably was not a good idea. And I'm actually sitting in his office right now, which is, one of those wonderful virtual backgrounds that Zoom introduced us to. My personal feeling is kind of what I said earlier. Art is art. Music is music. If you love Beethoven and you find out that Beethoven was an anti-Semite, are you going to not love Beethoven's music? So I feel that censorship of the arts is wrong, but I think what's important is the context. See, let's have a Wagner concert in Israel, but before you start it, you teach the audience how anti-Semitic Wagner really is and was, and how his works and were used by the Nazis to build up this incredible, movement of people who went along and thought, yeah, that's a good idea. Round up the Jews, put them in camps, and work them to death, and then burn them.
Yeah.
This was a society. This was German and European society that was considered the greatest culture in the history of the world, Germany, that agreed to do this.
Right.
And we think, it was limited to Germany in the 1920s and 30s. No, sorry. Here we are, 2022, and we're dealing with the same issues. And I think we have to deal with them even more. So as far as I'm concerned, play Wagner, but make sure you teach the truth about what he was used, what he felt, what he believed, and what he represented. And then you can judge the music as music.
Right. Okay, we're getting close to time, but what I just wanted to share, in my world of liturgical music, what came to my mind immediately, but not to be compared with because it wasn't anti-Semitism, but there was a ban. There have been bans on music for other reasons, but there was one in 2018, and I'm not going to say who. You might know who, but it was in response to the Me Too movement. And numerous women came forward to say that this composer sexually assaulted them, and there was a whole big debate. So, this is something that, is close to my life and my, in my work, and my calling as a cantor. I mean, these things are, they come up, they're prevalent, unfortunately, for different reasons. So.
And you don't have to share, but what was your feeling?
I really was very conflicted about it, but I felt as though this person's contribution to liturgical music, I separated the music. But I thought it was important to educate my community about the wrongdoings. So, I used it as as an opportunity to educate.
And I want to just quickly add one thing, that Wagner, and I've read Alex Ross's huge, tome on Wagner and Wagnerism and its influence on the world culture in general, architecture, huge, architecture, philosophy, art, visual arts. Not just music. Wagner is a creator of a national myth, of that, supermensch. That's what he is responsible for. And today we see the rise of anti-Semitism because today, speaking of former president, Make America Great Again, this is our nation, our state. It is again this ideological corner that we are the best, that leads to all kinds of racism, anti-Semitism, anti-gay, all kind of defining ourselves as better than somebody.
Right.
Who is different.
Right. Well, it's a very timely movie to be shown in this day and age. So I just really, really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart to actor Avi Hoffman and director Lilia Levitina from the movie You Will Not Play Wagner for joining us. And I suggest all of you see this Very, very provocative film. Once again, thank you to all of our members, our sponsors, our community partners, volunteers, and to all of you film lovers for participating in the Miami Jewish Film Festival.